cigarette. There's nothing much on except politics and a dry... Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Saturday Shemozzle. I am Bailey Don, joined by Charles Harrison from the UK.
Hello.
Doing this across borders like we did last time.
Indeed, yeah.
I decided to make this a fortnightly podcast because of the reasons related to mental health, and if I had to edit this every week, I think I'd go crazy.
How long did it actually take to edit?
Do you really want to know?
I am curious because it's a big thing, but I suppose it's not too much to cut out. Well, depending how good we are at speaking.
It wasn't too bad. If you don't include downloading your video, it took about 5 hours to put together.
Oh yeah, that's not too bad.
5-6 hours.
Yeah, that's all right.
And then if you include downloading your video, just add 7 hours onto that.
So it's longer to download the video than actually edit the video.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah, and then I went to export my the full video when I had edited everything, and then there was an electrical storm and the power went out.
Oh no.
So I had to start that again.
Oh dear.
Yeah, but it didn't take too long to bounce it out, so it wasn't too bad.
No, and I figured out how to make the video smaller now, so that should save you some time.
Yes, I do hope so. Because I downloaded your audio last time and it was a gig and it took about 20 minutes, half an hour. And then you sent me the video, which was 18 gig, and I thought, oh my Christ.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Anyway, in the 2 weeks that, well, not really 2 weeks since we last recorded it, but roughly, what have you been listening to? Anything new and interesting? Did you check out Avishai Cohen?
Yes, so I did. I think we spoke about that, didn't we, last time, about his album and what was it, the that tune, that classical tune. No, the
Moonlight Sonata.
Yeah, how he done a cover of that.
Yeah.
So I found that and had to listen to quite straight away actually. And I'm still not sure what I thought about it, to be honest. It was the same tune, obviously, but just on different instruments, and it just worked so well as a piano piece. I think it wasn't bad, but it was kind of, you were thinking, is this necessary? And does this actually add anything? Or have they just taken this well-known piece of music and just shoved it on different instruments?
Sorry, the video cut out.
Yeah. What are you going to say?
I was going to say one thing that I love so much about the original is how haunting it is and expressive, and I feel like that might be hard to get through on a jazz. I don't know what the arrangement was, but I'm guessing it would have had definitely a bass because he plays bass. Yeah. Possibly a piano, possibly some brass, drums.
Yeah, as far as I remember, it was just a jazz band, but with like a trumpet or something along those lines, just playing the melody all the way through. And it's not bad, but it just sounds like background music when it's, as you say, it's such an emotive piece. There's a lot going on, but it's just kind of sidelined to be a jazz band in the background. So I don't know. It's in some ways it's kind of clever what they've done, but yeah, it was a kind of bit underwhelming, I guess.
I might ask you to write a review for that if you don't mind, though, because that would be interesting, your thoughts on that, like your full thoughts in 700 words, like at uni.
What, on one song or the whole album?
No,
I didn't listen to the rest.
Oh, I thought you listened to the rest.
Not the whole album, no, but I could do.
If that's something you're interested in. If not, I can do it.
It actually seemed hard to find the whole album, because I first was looking at Avishai Cohen.
Yeah.
And couldn't find it under him. Even the links on his website to it didn't take me to it. And I eventually...
Is it not on Spotify?
Well, that's how I eventually found at least this song, by the band. I can't remember their name, but the band he collaborates with on the album.
Big Vicious.
Yeah, I found it with them, but I'm not sure if the actual album was on there. Just that song.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. I can look into it again.
Yeah.
So what about you? What have you been listening to since last time?
So I believe since last time, the reviews that have gone up were I might have actually already talked about this, but I did a review of Clayman by In Flames, which In Flames is a band that I've listened to for a while, but I'd never really got into their old stuff. Because right now, like modern day In Flames, they're like an alternative metal / like prog metal type thing with elements of melodic death metal, which is where their roots are, and metalcore.
Mm-hmm.
And In Flames was being released this month, 20th anniversary edition, with some re-recorded tracks, or if not the whole album re-recorded, I'm not sure. So I thought that would be a good opportunity to do a review on that, because I'd never listened to Clayman in it like the whole way through. And I did see the importance that album held when it was released in 2000, because they did something that other bands have done since, which is melding melodic death metal with other genres. And it was also key in developing the metalcore scene, which is metalcore is kind of like death metal meets punk. So,
right.
And it's got loads of breakdowns and stuff. So if you know bands like Unearth, I can't think of band names, they're just gone. Killswitch Engage, Galactic Empire. So you know the guys who do all of the metal versions of the Star Wars soundtrack. Yeah. They do it in metalcore style.
Okay.
So that's metalcore as well.
Yeah.
But I listened to the album and I was like, oh yeah, there's definitely elements of metalcore, and metalcore as we know it didn't exist in 2000 really. There was some avant-garde bands that were developing the metalcore sound, including In Flames, which I noticed after I did some Googling, because I could hear the metalcore in there, and I didn't know whether or not they were influenced by metalcore or if they sort of helped it along, and they kind of helped it along, and that's why it's such an influential album.
What makes it metalcore as opposed to something else?
It's the way, so like rhythms and stuff. So if you think like Meshuggah do with rhythm, but
right.
more like square kind of rhythms, rather than, you know, how they just go over the bar and they just groove it. Metalcore's more like structured and square. I'm not saying that Meshuggah isn't structured, but you know what I mean, kind of.
I'm not sure if I do. What, can you try saying that again?
I will just look up the definition of metalcore for you.
Okay. Do you mean it's sort of less musical?
No, so here we go. Metalcore is a fusion music genre that combines element of extreme metal and hardcore punk. And
okay,
it sort of arrived in the mid-90s, but then when bands actually became more popular with metalcore, it was when you know, Avenged Sevenfold, possibly Killswitch Engage, As I Lay Dying, Unearthed Trivium. It's more of an emphasis on the rhythm and stuff. Here we go. Characteristics.
Right.
Metalcore is known for its use of breakdowns in which it was preceded by heavy hardcore. Metalcore singers typically perform screaming, a vocal technique developed in the 80s. And later, metalcore bands often combine this with the use of standard singing, usually during the bridge or chorus of a song.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just basically another kind of metal, that subgenre that emerged in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, I guess a lot of these subgenres are as a result of people just experimenting, aren't they? Trying new things out or putting two things together.
Yeah.
And then ending up with a brand new genre, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because you got bands that throw extremes together. So have you heard of A Day to Remember?
I don't think so.
So they combined metalcore with pop punk because growing up they loved Blink-182 and then they got into metal. So they have these really weird songs where it's like, oh yeah, it's like got a really catchy pop punk chorus and then it goes into a like really brutal metal breakdown and it's like, oh, okay then.
That's cool. That makes sense to me. How they would get those new genres out of growing up with all their favorite
bands and
stuff, yeah, and then just thinking, I want to try this. I want to put this with this, and then we'll have this brand new thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
And
go on.
So going back to In Flames, this album was important because of the influence that it had on melodic death metal as a genre, and also the metalcore scene, which because of how popular that album was, a lot more metalcore bands arrived on the music scene. And
if there's melodic death metal, is there non-melodic death metal?
Well, melodic death metal is, if you've ever listened to Arch Enemy, At the Gates, in early In Flames, stuff like that. So it's like death metal, but instead of it's based off what bands like Cannibal Corpse, Suffocation, Atheist did, where it's like dissonant guitars and stuff like that. So dissonant solos, but still shredding. So melodic death metal takes that and basically just the solos and like the guitar melodies and harmonies are poppier, but it doesn't make the music any less heavy. It just means that you get a lot more melodic hooks in a song, for example.
Okay. Because I was thinking kind of the other direction, thinking, well, you can move into avant-garde music and electroacoustic music. I wonder if that can be combined with metal. And if it could, how?
Yeah, that's sort of like industrial metal.
Right, of course.
Bands I think Flesh God is a good example of that. It's kind of similar to using sampling.
Yeah, I don't know. It would probably end up just being electroacoustic rather than a combination. But just a thought, if you were basically trying to not have any melody in a metal track.
Well, I guess you could technically go and look at Meshuggah's Chaosphere album. That's got very few like melodies as we know it and as we'd call it. That's just that was super experimental for them. It's when they first tried using 8-string guitars, I believe.
Ooh.
I think I might need to fact check that. It might be the album afterwards. I'm not sure.
Well, it sounds good. That's probably another way of making all these new genres, is trying new techniques out as well.
Yeah.
Or things that haven't been done as often in that genre.
That's true. And what else? Oh, this week, because I could and I was intrigued, I tried to figure out which year I owned the most albums from.
Ah, interesting. Was it a year in the 80s?
A year in the 80s was in the top 4.
Not bad.
Which I thought that I would have more from the 80s. I think maybe, actually looking at this, I don't think I have more from the 80s as a decade either. But, so my top year, it's actually a tie between 2019 and 2017.
Oh, that sort of makes sense.
Where I own 24 albums from each year.
Yeah.
Then second is 2016.
Okay.
because I actually looked through that and I thought, wow, there's actually a lot of that stuff is prog and gent. So it's when I sort of first started getting into that kind of stuff. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ben Force.
Yeah.
And then third is 2018, and then tied at fourth is 2012 and 1986.
Interesting that your top three then align with my impression of you at uni buying loads of music.
Yeah, but just because I was buying music doesn't mean I was buying new music either.
No, but I guess it did actually.
Yeah, I mean, I do like some of the older stuff, but that's not counting my record collection though, because I think a lot more of that is from the 80s and 70s.
Well, it's good that I've known you to always like to support new bands, and that's kind of a rare thing, really, especially buying their records and their albums and things. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and 2020, I think I only have like 9 albums so far, but that's going to change soonish.
Yeah, you've still got some time left.
Yeah, and speaking of 2020 albums, I did a review on a band called Faceless Burial, which I talked about last episode. They're from Australia, they're from Melbourne, and I got that wrong last time. I said Brisbane, but I meant Melbourne.
Oops.
And I did the review, and it's just so hard to write about it because they are very unique. So I thought the opening couple of tracks, I was like, it's brutal death metal, kind of Cannibal Corpse reminiscent with a bit of Suffocation in there. And then the more you progress in the album, the more progressive the music, and it starts becoming more like midlife death. So towards the early 90s, I keep hitting my microphone. The mid 90s era of death, where it's like not quite as extreme as death, but they're adding polyrhythms, they're changing tempos and time signatures and stuff like that. And the more I listened to it, the more I just fell in love with that album.
Do you think they produced it chronologically then, and it just kind of got better and better as they made it?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it was their decision to put the more progressive stuff towards the end of the album. I don't know. And they're showing that they will evolve more into progressive death with their future outputs.
Oh yeah, I just wonder because I've known that experience of working on music, and as you keep working on it, it gets better, and you try new things out, and your creative process is just amplified as you go along. So if you do make it consecutively, you'll probably end up with your best work nearer the end.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I haven't listened to any of their other albums, so I don't know what they sound like normally. But this album really had me stumped, and I was struggling to find things to say about it that I wasn't repeating myself. And trying to keep it fresh. So I went and looked at Angry Metal Guy's review of it, and he said exactly the same thing as me.
Wow.
I put a quote in there from him because he said something along the lines of, it's a really tough album to review because, you know, it's just really good. So, yeah.
That makes it curious, actually, to be so good that it's hard to review. I think that'll make people want to listen.
Yeah, if you're into death metal. I know not everyone is.
True.
And I think that, to be honest, in a few years, or 10 years down the road, that will be like one of the iconic death metal albums of the early 2020s.
Interesting you say the word iconic.
Is it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that your segue?
Yes. I don't know if you could tell. It was a bit more smooth than last time.
Yeah, it's getting better. Yeah. Do you want to start? on iconic albums then?
Well, yes, we can do. So Charles and I thought it would be interesting to talk about what makes an album iconic, and all of that kind of stuff. And we've put together some points that we think make an album iconic. I went off my gut feeling and what I think makes an album iconic, and Charles did research on the internet. So it'd be quite interesting to see the difference of my opinion versus the internet's opinion.
Yeah, mine is like, I guess it's still somewhat of my opinion, but I have a thesis, I guess, that I'll pitch to you.
Fair enough.
At the end.
Ooh, okay. So you want me to talk about my points first?
I can talk about mine. I don't mind, but I'll be interested to hear what you say first, to be honest.
Okay, so what? Well, so I'm going to talk about what I think makes an album iconic, and then I'm going to list 2 albums that are iconic to me.
Yeah, okay.
They're 2 drastically different albums. So, in my opinion, an iconic album has value in repeat listens. So it's an album that you can just listen to one day, then listen to the next day, and then listen to the day after that, and keep listening, and you enjoy it. It always, there's always something new maybe to experience. I don't know, like if you you listen to it again and you're paying more attention and you're like, oh, I've never heard that thing there that's deep in the mix or whatever type thing. It might not be the best, it might not have the best song by that artist, but it is the best collection of songs that artist has put together. So it's how also the songs relate to each other.
That's an interesting take, yeah.
In my opinion, it also has to show some kind of innovation. So be it production-wise or composition-wise, it's got to be something different, new, or an amalgamation of both. Kind of like, I'll use this as an example, but Tales of Mystery and Imagination by the Alan Parsons Project. The composition was quite strange, and they used new technologies as well. It was the first commercial album to use a vocoder.
Interesting.
So, because Alan Parsons was working at Abbey Road Studios, he made the most of it by using all of the new technology at his disposition. And
when was that?
1977 or 76, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's not my example of an iconic album. That's just me saying what that could be, like technology wise or whatever. And now I've got a point where I reckon an iconic album will be timeless, which I think can also, that rule can be broken depending on the album. So like I'll use AC/DC's Back in Black, released in 1980, sounds a lot better than some albums I've heard this year.
Yeah, true.
So that's like timeless in the production of it. But then I think also then there's the other thing where if an album is very time specific, it can also like bring some kind of nostalgia or something like that, where like, for example, most of Anti-Flag's albums are very much a product of the year that they were released. So 2020 Vision is all about hating Trump and trying to stand united, as a people. So that's very, 2019, 2020. And that could also be seen as an iconic album in the future with retrospect and hindsight and all that kind of stuff.
I guess, yeah.
And I think that an iconic album needs good pacing. So just because, I tend to think, the 42 minute rule applies for a lot of stuff, and it should apply for a lot of stuff. So in case people aren't aware, the 42 minute rule is on a record. 42 minutes was deemed the maximum amount of music you could put on a single record. So that's both sides put together.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you had more music than that, you'd have to trim it down and try and make it fit. But just because you've made a double album, that could also be well paced too. So you get a bit of both. Like, I think a couple of examples spring to mind. Slayer's Rain and Blood, I think that's like 28 minutes long or something ridiculously short like that. That's probably one of the most iconic albums for a lot of people who love thrash metal. And yet on the other side of the spectrum, you've got Metallica with And Justice for All, which I think is like 80 minutes of music.
18?
Something ridiculous, like 80.
Oh, 80.
An hour 20, I think. Yeah, because I think the record, when it came out, it was two vinyls. So 80-ish minutes of music there. And that's also deemed as an iconic album. So it all has to do with the pacing. And speaking of pacing, that moves on to my first iconic album, which is a Paul Kelly album, but it's not the album you're thinking of, Charles.
Oh.
It's Gossip. It's an album released actually in 1986, which is the fourth most popular year I have. And it was released as a double album. It's an hour 22-ish, something like that. And the pacing is really, really well thought of. So it opens with like a slowish kind of song called Last Train to Heaven, I think. And then it goes, that's like 4.5 minutes of slow-paced music. And then it goes into some more upbeat songs like Before Too Long. What's the other one? There's a couple of Adelaide, which are more like rock-infused songs, so they're more fast-paced and everything. And then, you know, every now and then you've got a slower song thrown in there.
That's a really interesting point about pacing, because pacing is kind of important in films, important in shows, important in concerts, important in a lot of things. So to consider that for an album, I think is really a valid point. And you want to be able to listen from the start to the finish without feeling bored, without feeling like your expectations have been subverted. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, it's because he needs something to break up the fast-pacedness of the song. That's not a word, but that's what I'm going with.
Exactly.
The fast pacing of the album, even, sorry, not the song. Then every now and then you got a couple of slow songs in there and stuff like that. So it's quite well done. And also the production still holds up today. Like, even though it's 1986, there's not like huge amounts of reverb on the drums, you know, like typical 80s, oh yeah, let's do what Phil Collins did type thing. It's restrained production and it still sounds really good. And my other iconic album is an album that was released last year, which I believe in 10 years' time I will still enjoy as much as I do now. And it's We Are Not Your Kind by Slipknot. And I thought about this long and hard, and I thought, well, if I'm thinking of Slipknot, yes, there's so much there to pick from because I really like Slipknot. But then I listened back to We Are Not Your Kind, and it's just the way that they experimented on that album. Unlike the previous albums, they hadn't done anything like this before. I really appreciate that, and that goes back to like the innovation and experimentation. They use samples. They do like short bits of pseudo music stuff with like to break up in between the songs and all of that. So they've also got some really catchy melodic songs on there as well, and just some really heavy, brutal riffs too. That it's not the most memorable of albums, but it gets the cake because they also experimented with time signatures too, which I'm a sucker for.
Slipknot as a band are very diverse and they cover a lot of bases, and they because of that, what they do tends to turn into some very fantastic production from every level, from the music level to the production itself, the mixing, whatever. All that creativity from all those different people just comes together into something pretty special usually.
Yeah, and also what I love about Slipknot is that the musicians all have different backgrounds.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
like Mick Thompson, he really loves, metal, death metal, all of that stuff. He's one of the I think I just said that, but he's one of the guitarists. And the other guitarist, Joe Root, he doesn't listen to metal. He listens to like 70s and 80s rock, so like Rolling Stones. He loves Radiohead. He listens to, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, all of that kind of stuff. And yet you put the two together and you somehow get Slipknot's guitarists.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I appreciate about it, and that's why I think it's a good choice for being iconic, because as I'll get to when I talk about what I was looking at, that's sort of what I concluded, that it's about creativity and innovation, really.
Yeah. And just one more thing about Slipknot is that album, as I said, isn't the most memorable. I can only remember a certain amount of songs from that album that I can remember the melodies of and stuff. But it's the feeling also that you get when you're listening to that album that stays with you. And that's why I picked that one over, other albums that could have potentially, that I remember more fondly of. Remember more fondly, but that one is just there because of the amount of creativity and thought that went into it. And I'm really excited for them to release a bunch of they did a bunch of experimental stuff about 10 years ago, and they're waiting for the tour cycle to finish, and they're going to release that as another album.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. That'll be good to hear.
And I just love, they've got a song, I think it's called Spiders on We Are Not Your Kind, and it's in 7/8, which you don't expect from Slipknot, really.
Don't you?
No, I don't think there's any alternate time signatures in any other Slipknot song.
Weird. I would have thought, I mean, I don't know all their work, but I would have thought they would have tried that stuff out more often than not.
Yeah, I mean, there might be the odd, 3-4.
Maybe it's all covered up really well and you don't notice.
Possibly. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of... Nah. Unless maybe in the song Iowa, which is 15 minutes of death metal hell. But yeah, no. So those are my thoughts on what makes an album iconic, and those were my two iconic albums, Gossip and We Are Not Your Kind, which are quite drastically different as well.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting, everything you said, because it more or less feeds into the kind of conclusion that I was making when I did my research. So I was looking up iconic albums, lists of iconic albums and all that, just to remind myself of some of the real more famous ones, and then to look into what possibly made them iconic. So I started off with the Beatles, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967.
I really don't like that album. Come on, haters, at me.
That, to be fair,
I'm not a huge Beatles fan though either.
That's got a lot of tracks on it that I did know, so I can't say I dislike it. It's kind of before my time, but I'm aware of it and have listened to a lot of the songs from that album. But it's one worth looking into. for the production, so I was doing that. And really, a lot of credit goes to Jeff Emmerich, the sound engineer. And this is why I could just hear you going slap, 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 typing away.
Yeah, I'm looking it up because I don't know what songs are on there apart from Lucy and the Sky with Diamonds.
Yeah, shout out some songs. Have you found it?
I'm going down to the... Holy shit, the Wikipedia page is so big. Oh,
it's
with a little help from my friends.
Iconic album. Yeah.
Ah. I didn't know Ringo Starr wrote that. Wow. That's like his
and
only
he sang it, I
claim
think.
to fame, is it? So
wow,
I know,
harsh.
with a little help from my friends, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and that's it.
Really? I thought there was more. Hang on, I got to check now.
Well, do you want... I can just read you the songs.
Just read them out, yeah. Go on.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, with a little help from my friends, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, She's Leaving Me, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, Within You, Without Me, When I'm 64, Lovely Rita, Good Morning, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band Reprise, and A Day in the Life.
Yeah, I think there's about 4 in the middle there that I knew already. I guess they're all... if you don't like the Beatles, I guess they all kind of sound like the Beatles, don't they? Because it's one of their earlier albums, isn't it? So it's very, yeah, whatever.
66. It was sort of the mid. Yeah.
I don't actually know.
Because they broke up in 70 or 71, I think.
But anyway, my point is about their sound engineer.
Yeah.
And I was reading this, it's fascinating, and looking at an interview with him later in life. He was innovative and creative in his recording techniques, which is why it was really interesting hearing what you were saying earlier, before the internet killed you, about trying new things out, trying different techniques, how that to you is iconic or helps with an iconic album. And this is what I found looking into this album, which is a very famous one, that the engineer was taking risks. In fact, for one example, for a piano solo recording, Jeff Emmerich introduced a wobble underneath the piano sound by sticking pieces of editing tape to the guide rollers on the tape machine that was feeding the audio from the piano to a separate echo chamber. He later speculated that the conservative management at EMI, the company that owned Abbey Road Studios, where it was being recorded, would have fired him on the spot if they had known what he was doing. And today, that technique is used as a plugin, or is available as a plugin in digital sound processing.
Wow.
So I just thought that was really interesting trivia, that he was fully aware that what he was doing was not the right way to do it and not what they would have wanted him to be doing, yet that's what actually quite literally made the sound of the album.
Yeah.
And another little tidbit about that is the almost 40 minutes of music on the album took over 700 hours of studio time to produce. And much of that time was spent working out arrangements and practicing, because they had to record it all in long takes to get around the 4-track recorder issues. So yeah, that was a really interesting point. The next one I was looking into was Michael Jackson's Thriller, which, to be fair to myself, that is an album I know quite a lot of tracks on. I know well enough, considering I wasn't alive then. I know it pretty well growing up, and so it is probably quite iconic to me, actually. Michael Jackson's music, for whatever reason, sounds a lot different to a lot of music in the 80s, I would say. Definitely some cliches thrown in there, but the production quality, in particular, you'll see where I'm going with this. Yeah, yes. So shouting out again, recording engineer Bruce Swedian. But
I don't think it was just him, though, because Quincy Jones had a lot to do with Michael Jackson too.
Yeah, Quincy Jones was kind of a producer, though, I think. I don't think he actually, based on what I was reading, he's not involved necessarily in the recording. He's involved in the kind of decisions behind that, and saying he's kind of involved in the arrangement and choosing what instruments and all that sort of stuff. But the actual recording techniques, how they recorded it, was not up to him. It was up to this guy Bruce, and good day Bruce. And interestingly, a similar thing I found as with the Beatles, Quincy Jones in fact said to Bruce, "We have to leave space for God to walk through the room," which according to Bruce meant we need room for the unexpected to happen. So he was given opportunities again to try unusual things. Nobody interfered with what he was doing. He was able to set up mics that he knows he used. I don't know if you're gonna say something just then. Were you?
No, I'm just listening.
And he innovated a way to record more tracks at once as well, because even though it was 15 years later, tape recorders still had limits. I think it was 24 tracks, it said.
Yeah.
So he was finding ways to innovate with that so they could record even more. There you go. Even more at once. One really cool thing, if you can guess, that I found out about that whole album, for most of the lead vocals of Michael Jackson, can you guess what microphone they used? Or Bruce used?
Could be
bearing
anything.
in mind, bearing in mind we're being innovative, creative, and not doing the normal things.
I missed that. What did you say?
I said, bearing in mind that this whole topic is about innovation and doing things that people would normally say that's not a good idea to do.
Would it be using like an MD 241 or something as for vocals? Because I know that's a popular microphone now for vocals, but it might not have been back then.
Which one is that? Is that for the kick drum?
No, it's for guitar and like toms and snare and stuff.
Well, you're along the right lines actually.
Was it a 57 or a 58?
It was a Shure SM57.
Oh.
Which, as we've learned at university, and many people listening, if they're interested in sound, will know, is almost the go-to microphone for a snare drum.
And for electric guitar.
Yeah, basically anything except a voice. Anything loud except a voice, basically.
Well, it's really good for live vocals, and I have one here.
It is good for live vocals. There you go, exactly.
This is what it looks like. It's good for live vocals. It sounds a bit strange. I do prefer for vocals the 58. That's just my preference.
Which is more common for live stuff, the 58.
It's because the 58's got like it's hypercardioid or something, and this is not as well. I mean, it says there, but I feel like it's not. It's just got something different to it.
Well, I thought it was pretty interesting because he said of this that there was a lot of raised eyebrows, a lot of people kind of thinking, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. A lot of people who thought they knew better, basically. But as I said earlier, he was allowed to do whatever he wanted to do, and that's what he decided to do.
Yeah.
And maybe in some ways it helped with the punchiness of that
Jackson's voice,
that music. Yeah. Which leads me to the final one I looked into. It's not in chronological order.
Yeah.
Because we go back to the source of all modern music, which is the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson.
Some people might disagree with you there, but okay.
Well, I've researched this. It's fact now. But basically, there's not as much to say about this one. But the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
Yeah. That
is an album I know a lot of music from that album.
Yeah.
Growing up, again, even though it's from 1966, I know a lot of that music, and it's all really good. If you listen to the quality of it, especially the remastered stuff, which kind of helps, but if you listen to the quality of it, it's really good quality considering everything was probably on 4-track recorders again, and they all had to record in mono, more than likely. And again, Brian Wilson, I think he was the engineer or producer. on that album has got so much praise from people like Paul McCartney, Freddie Mercury, Stevie Wonder, Bob Dylan, Philip Glass, Eric Clapton, and many more. Paul McCartney reportedly called the God Only Knows song, which is a great song,
Yeah, that's true.
the most perfect song ever written.
Interesting.
So that it is interesting, considering that's why I started with the Beatles, because this is before them, and has been admitted to have influenced them. And once again, it was trying out new things. It was combining all this guy's vast array of knowledge about music and orchestration and writing songs, and yeah, quite possibly that is the most iconic album I came across, because it really literally inspired so many people.
It was actually released the same year as Sgt. Pepper's.
I think Sgt. Pepper was the year after, actually. They recorded it in the same year.
I just looked at it. So Beach Boys was released, Pet Sounds was released in 66, and almost there. Oh, it was released in 67, but it was started recording in 66 for
exactly. Yeah, which goes along with this idea that a lot of people were influenced by that album. And if Paul McCartney, as he admitted, had been listening to it, and other people around that time, going into the studio, making their own thing, because the whole reason the Beatles made that album is because they wanted to make their own album in a studio. They didn't want to do any more live music.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that was somewhat of an influence of that decision as well. But all in all, that is my mini conclusion on what I was looking at yesterday, is somewhat along the lines of what you were saying, is the the innovation of the sound engineers, the recording engineers, the mixers, and somewhat the band as well, because obviously they get involved in that a little bit. But it's the innovation and the creativity and the willingness to try out all these new things, also given a lot of probably money and time to be able to try these things out, but still, that inevitably brings out something completely new and iconic.
Yeah, fair enough. And going off that, if you picked, to you, the two most iconic albums to you, what would they be after saying all of this stuff?
Yeah, to be fair, I have to admit, Michael Jackson's music, and even the Jackson 5, and even more broadly Motown in general, but let's stick with Michael Jackson, did influence me a lot, actually, growing up. And at first I was never really into it, I suppose, but then, a bit like you were saying about some of yours, the more I listened to it, the more I found in it. And that is in part due to these techniques I was researching, that they were able to record so much stuff in so many tracks in the music. And I think probably the Thriller album, I guess that's the most well-known one, even for me as well. It would probably be one of my iconic ones. To pick two, I'm really not sure about the second one. The Beach Boys is good. I don't know, because then the other side of being iconic, like you were talking about, is kind of what it means to you and things like that. So I could probably pick something completely different, like the Danish String Quartet album, Woodworks, or something completely different, but has different influence and iconicity. Is that a word? I don't know.
Iconicness.
Iconicness. Yeah. I don't know, to be honest, about a second one.
Okay.
It feels somewhat wrong to have two iconic albums, unless they're from different eras, I guess.
That's why I picked two, because they were from different eras and quite contrasting.
Yeah, I guess for me, what always impresses me and makes me listen more and more is the quality of the album. So the production quality I'm talking about. and that's why Michael Jackson's Thriller always stood out.
It is so
And
good, like the production on that album.
It is.
I'm not a very big Michael Jackson fan, but I do know that Thriller has, I think the production is pretty much timeless, like along the lines of, you know, AC/DC's Back in Black as well.
Yeah.
And it's surprisingly dry for the 80s.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm just trying to think back, because I haven't listened to it for a while, but if I think of like Billie Jean and stuff like that, there's basically no reverb, or if there is, it's very subtle.
Yeah, it's really clever how they use all those effects and things. It was mentioned in the article I was looking at by Bruce again, who was helping on the mixes, that he was really against compressors and limiting, and really tried to push everything, I think, in more natural ways, I suppose, using automation and just recording well to start with. So all of that combined with whatever Quincy Jones did, which was a lot, turned into a really high quality album that still, as you say, still sounds high quality today, is better than a lot of stuff out there today, really.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much all we have time for, and we've run out of stuff to say now.
Yeah, that was our topic. It was a very interesting one to look into, and it'll be interesting to see what becomes iconic in the future as well. Maybe stuff we know now that we think, oh, that's not iconic, that's just Ed Sheeran's top 10 or whatever. And it'll become iconic in the future.
Speaking of Ed Sheeran, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but for like the last couple of albums that he's released, the whole album has ended up in the charts. Like the songs individually have all ended up in like the top 20.
Wow.
I think most notably it was when he released Divide. I think there's like 12 songs on that album, and they were all in the top 15 or top 20 or something like that in the charts.
That's crazy. Wow, good for him, I guess.
Yeah.
And his producers. I've been doing these Celtic covers of not always pop music, but sometimes pop music, and by doing that I've been looking at and listening to popular music that I might not have ordinarily listened to, and it has given me that insight into how there can still be a really good song underneath it.
Despite the pop face.
Yeah, and sometimes you get that, and some of these artists, that you can hear the talent. Maybe it's the voice, maybe there's a really good singer, or maybe the song itself and the way it's written is really nice and really good. But they all fit into that genre, obviously, of pop. But pop is
so broad.
Pop is always, well, I was almost going to say the opposite, that pop is broad over time, but it's always defined by obviously what lots of people are listening to. So everybody's always then following what's popular. So it all ends up sounding the same because that's what's popular, until that gradually changes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a good point that you can still like the artist, but sometimes they might be over produced, I suppose.
And on that note, that is the end of the show. And I didn't mean that pun, actually. It's a good one. It just slipped out, yeah. I'm a pun person and I didn't know it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
there's a few technical difficulties in this one. I'm really hoping my video has recorded this time.
That has been the show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about some other topic that people probably don't really care about.
But we'll make you care about it.
Yes, exactly. It'll be called the Saturday Shemozzle effect. It's kind of like the John Oliver effect, except to a lesser extent.
Yeah, and about music.
Not about corrupt governments.
Yeah, not about American politics.